Hello, how are you doing? Now in this video we're going to write some React code. Okay, but before we do that, let's get rid of all these CSS we don't really need. If we need, we can create later, right? We're not going to run the test, so let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of the logo. Okay, and let's just keep, this is the main file, index.js. Okay, and this is the only one component we have. Okay, now let's go here. Let's get rid of the index reference here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's fine. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to make an API call, because I don't really like to hard code write some data and then just write something here to play around, because I don't really like to work with dummy data. Because when you're working in a real world environment, you will be making API calls, you're getting the data from the API, and you will be rendering and all that stuff, right? Now when you work with the local data like so, it works, but it's different than making an API call, because that takes few seconds to come. So during that time the data is not available in your component, and then when you want to render, you don't see the data, you get an error and you get frustrated. Okay, so I'm not going to use this hard-coded data. Instead, I'm going to directly make an API call to the open source API we have available. I'm going to use the one that is called random uses, so that we can get the random uses and play around with that data. Okay, so to make an API call, the first thing I need is some kind of the library to make ajax call easier. Okay, so we're not going to use jQuery. Obviously it doesn't make sense to work with React. So what we can do is we can use this Axios. So Axios, if you haven't heard about Axios, it is, let's go have a look. So it is a promise-based HTTP client. Okay, so we can use Axios to make API calls. Okay, and it makes it really easy because it is a promise-based. We can chain using .then, and we can catch the errors using the catch method. Okay, so let's give it a try. First thing we need is we need to install this package, right? So let's install here using either npm or yarn. You can run npm install Axios. I'm going to use yarn add Axios. Okay. Okay, so once it is done, it's ready to use. Let's bring our application to the start status. Okay, and then I can import Axios from Axios. Okay, because this is a package, I don't need to give the path like so. Okay, now the very first thing we need is we need to be able to hold the data in the local component. Okay, so we in React we call it a state. So the state will hold the data. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a constructor props super props. So we know that ES6 class component can use a constructor to initialize internal component state. Okay, so what you're trying to do is we're trying to create a state. Okay, so you do that using this dot state equals to this object, and you can add properties. Okay, so in this case we will try to add the users. Okay, we will make an API call, get all the users and store in our local state so that we can play around with this data. So currently it is empty, obviously, because we haven't made any API calls, but once we do, this array will be filled with the users data. Okay, so this is how you begin. Okay, so you create a constructor super. Inside here, inside the constructor, you create a state, and based on the application you're building, you add the properties and the value they hold. Okay, so for the moment it's empty. Now we need to make an API call and store that data in the state users. Okay, so here I can use one of the React's lifecycle method that is called component will mount. Okay, so this method comes with React. Now this method is useful when you want to make some API calls just before the component mounts. It says will mount, right? So just before the component mounts, we can use this method. And there is another one that is also super useful, that is called component did mount. So this is before the component mounts. Component did mount is right after the component mounted. Okay, so these two are mostly used, and there are few of the other ones as well. Now just before the component will mount, I want to make an API call using this Axios library. Okay, so let's use this Axios. Now here we can pass the URL. Okay, so which URL you are trying to make an API call. So that one is here. Okay, so this is api.randomuser.me, and what nationality is US, and results we want 5. Okay, so let's copy this. This is an open source API, so you don't need to register, get client ID or anything, so it's very good to use. So let's copy this and come here and let's paste here. So this is the API, this is the URL that we want to make an API call. Then, because this is Axios is promise based, okay, so we get to use then. So once we make a call, then we get response, right? Response, and using this arrow function, let's console log the response so that we can see what we get. Let's fix this typo. Okay, let's go, and we get the response as you can see in our console. Beautiful. So this response contains the data. Inside this data we have the results of 5 items in an array. So this results contains, it is an array and it contains 5 users. Beautiful. Okay, so what we can do now that we have this data, we can put this data in the states users array. Okay, so how we do that is by using this method called setState. In React, every time you want to make changes or update the state, you always use setState method. Okay, that is the only way React knows that state has been changed, and it will re-render the application with the changes. Okay, so use then response. Now using this arrow function, what we can do is this set state method. Okay, so this is important. Every time you want to make change to the state, you use this. You don't directly modify, instead you use this. You don't use the push method or anything like that. You just use set state. Okay, because we don't want to mutate the state, we just want to create a new object so the old data is not overwritten. Okay, so this set state, now what you're trying to do here, we want to give an object, right? So within this object, the key is users, the value currently it's empty, but now we have the value, so we can set the value using response. And if you see here, it's a response.data.results, right? So users, the value will be response.data.results. Okay, so because this component will mount method runs automatically, we don't have to invoke this function. Okay, so as soon as the component before it mounts, it runs, it makes an API call and it sets the state, so the users will have the users data. So if you refresh, let's save this one, refresh. Okay, we don't see anything because we're not console logging. So what we can do is if you don't have this React Dev Tools, Chrome, make sure you install this one. It is super useful when you're developing. Okay, so I have already added, so if you don't have it, just add it, and maybe you need to restart your browser. Okay, so once you do that, what you will see is you will see this React tab here. Okay, and as you can see on the right side, you see the state, and the state has the users 5 items in it. Beautiful. Okay, so we have the users in our state. Now what we can do is we can loop through all the users that are available in the state and render in our application. So using this render method, we can render all the users using JSX. So let's do that in the next video. Thank you.